Okay, for our reader goals, I need to remind you that now that we're finishing up the course, there's kind of a lot of interesting connection, overlap, and stragglers left over, little things that didn't fit in the course elsewhere. So I kind of have a lot for you to write on this too. Um, in number 30, it turns out that tar sand mining has a lot of dirty water and that needs to be impounded, impoundment ponds. You can read about it on the screen. Um, and those ponds look like a really good stopover for migratory birds. You know, when they fly over, they just see water, so they want to go dive there. But that fluid is toxic to birds. And we have most of our tar sand mining in the Canadian tundra, which is a place where migratory birds are found for about half the year. Like a majority of the world's migratory birds. I believe it's the #1 migratory destination by bird count. And so, impoundment ponds are a really big threat um, to migratory birds. Interesting. You can read about it. In number 32, again, you should read about this. But presidents matter. We had a argument about whether or not we should allow mountaintop removal. It made coal cheaper, and it made a few companies a lot of money. But of course, it was filling in thousands of miles of streams in Appalachia. So some nerd was like, we should just make a law that you have to measure how dirty the water is. And that became a law. And by measuring how dirty the water was, every mountaintop removal site became unpermittable because obviously they're filling the water with mud. And so when they show all that mud, they can't keep going. Fascinating what it takes to overturn giant economic forces. And again, it really matters who's in charge. Number 36, same thing about the parts of the food waste. Of the waste stream. Number 37, just read the cartoon. We'll come back to number 38. There's a few clumped at the end of this video. Number 40, it's tough to recycle paper because grinding up trees is really cheap, especially when you're already using most of the tree for wood. It uses kind of a lot of energy, and especially to move all the stuff around. So we don't recycle much paper in the United States. We usually sell our recycling to other countries. Basically, don't worry about building a logging industry. Here's a bunch of stuff that you can deal with that's probably simpler than using logs, right? And so we just sell people the replacement for zero to logging. Now, once you get your paper, you still have to grind it up and you still have to bleach it, same as you do with the trees. And like shipping stuff internationally is a hassle. Like you have to receive it and dock it and ship it and inspect it and handle it. So this only makes sense in younger economies. When an economy is growing really fast, they're like, dude, we're going to get our own logging, but for now, let's crank out the paper because we need all these manuals for whatever your country's producing. If you already had a robust lumber industry, it wouldn't make any sense to recycle paper. So we can only recycle our paper when somebody needs to buy it, and they only need to buy it when their economy's at a certain age but growing fast. So interestingly, our environmental success relies on rapid global development and growth. Isn't that interesting? I hope that made sense. The question was, why do we send all of our recycling to Asia, by the way? I should have said that. All right. Number 43 introduces a little bit of vocab. Since landfills off-gas so much methane, and by the way, they off-gas a bunch of other stuff like hydrogen sulfide and carbon monoxide. And since landfills off-gas so many nasty gases, how are you going to deal with all of that gas leaving? And it turns out that phytocapping works really well. You just cover the land with vegetation. Remember Ealing's Park? We irrigate the heck out of it and grow stuff there. So phytocapping is a general term, not just for landfills, where you cover something with plants. So like if you have to pause a development permit for a house, some cities will ask you to cover the dirt with grass seeds, right? They're like, oh, if you're not going to be able to work on that house for 2 years, don't leave it bare dirt, phytocap it. Phytocapping is a generic term, but it's especially useful in landfills because it limits gases. And speaking of hazardous material, you can also cover the soil in mushrooms. You know, you throw some like straw and then some spores, because mushrooms are really good at absorbing radioisotopes and heavy metals. So for some types of chemical spills, including radioactive material, we can do what's called mycocapping, which is using mushrooms to cover the soil. Okay, there's 2 articles at number 45 that you should probably read. Imagine if I offered you a ton of money to let me dump chemical waste in your neighborhood, and by coincidence, you just hated all of your neighbors and you were trying to leave town anyway. I'm like, here, man, here's like $1 billion. Can I dump all this in your neighborhood? And you're like, bro, I hate them all and I want to get out of here. Sure. Considering that option, of course, we'd all take the money, right? Considering that option, I want you to go read 2 separate articles numbered 45 about international hazardous material management. Number 46 is a great example of poorly regulated or artisanal or like not really legal, not necessarily illegal, just sort of outside the law, gold mining. And it's a short article and it's fascinating. And I think we've talked a lot about gold mining in this class, so I think it's a good idea for you to read that article. Now, in the reader and in your book, there's these whisperings about e-waste. I used to have study goals about it. I'm replacing all of that with this one section. Just a few minutes, I got to talk about e-waste. I don't know about you, but I'm 43. I had my first cell phone when I was 17 or 18. And I basically burn through a phone every 1.5 years, give or take. So by now, like my desk here in this house has like 9 dead cell phones, mine and my wife's. At some point, my kids would play with them. Now my daughter has her own cell phone. My boy has a phone that he kind of uses like it's just for Wi-Fi in the house. There's a lot of e-waste out there. And remember I told you there's all these fascinating chemical revolutions to make electronics smaller and faster and lighter. Think of all the electronic junk. I mean, I don't know if you're really doing this at your house, but if you start to set aside all of your electronic waste, it's a ton. And maybe you know, or maybe you saw in a previous lecture that we try to divert e-waste from our waste stream. You don't want it going into a landfill. You want your e-waste to be carefully managed. Most of us imagine that it'll be recycled, but think about it. How hard would you have to work to salvage 60 cents out of this thing? Look at my picture, by the way. Look at my beautiful children. I hope you can see them. They've been rock climbing with me. How much would it cost to salvage the materials out of this? Right? Like this might have $1, probably less than $1 of salvage material. And that's probably in like 300 little pieces, little tiny, just hairs of titanium and platinum and gold. And there's stuff in here, but it's not a ton. They're like thousands of a gram or whatever. The labor required to pull apart that little hair of stuff Costs a lot of money, especially in the United States. If you're paying people a living wage to tear apart that phone, you're going to spend like $80 to recover like $1. So that's a losing business, right? You're not going to make money. You're going to lose money. It costs money to recycle e-waste correctly. So you and I keep going to the event at Earl Warren Showgrounds, or we leave the special box and call Marburg to pick it up out front, under the assumption that e-waste will be recycled in some kind of an ethical manner, but there's no market for that. You can't make money doing that. Instead, what happens is most of our e-waste is clumped together and hustled. People ship it internationally and they sell it to scavengers, people who are not paid a living wage, and people who are not working in sanitary conditions. They just down value the material. So the first guy will take all the glass out and sell that for recycling, and the second guy will take all the copper out and sell that for copper, and somebody else will melt all the motherboards and get a little bit of solder to sell. And the consequences are horrific. So this is internationally illegal, but we say we're recycling it. It's a pretty horrible scam. I've got some slides to show you. Imagine the growth of computing. This is like a 20-year-old slide. And the growth of mobile phones. Again, this is like a 20-year-old slide. There's a ton of e-waste. I'm talking to you in my little man cave where I've got motors for making fishing rods and a bunch of heating stuff. I've got some pretty high quality sound in here. And the system that I just added for the purpose of school is 2 LED flat screens, an iPad, the video camera, the microphone. I added an extra light. There's a Mac Mini down there. I got a keyboard and a mouse. And that means I also had to kill my old computer, which used to be in here before but wasn't working very well. That was an old iMac. Imagine the amount of e-waste we have globally. And it all gets shipped. It just goes somewhere else, make it somebody else's problem. It used to go to China, and then China got embarrassed, so it used to go to Pakistan, and then Pakistan got embarrassed, so it all started to go to Bangladesh, and then Bangladesh got embarrassed. So lately we've been shipping it all to Nigeria, and now that I know about Nigeria, it's probably somewhere else. In your reader, it talks about Ivory Coast. I don't know how to pronounce this right. Côte d'Ivoire? Côte d'Ivoire? I don't know how to say that. Ivory Coast. And now that we know about the Ivory Coast, it's probably going somewhere else. But basically, some guy shows up with a big truck and says, yo, $2 per TV. And somebody looks at that and goes, I don't know, I could probably get $1 for the glass, and then I could sell the rest to my cousin who's gonna get 50 cents for all the copper, and then he could sell the rest to that one kid at the junkyard who collects all the motherboards to go make solder or whatever. And after they're done with it and it doesn't have a lot of value, there's probably some poor kid that's desperate to get plastic out of this to make cheap toys or whatever. By the way, this is why a lot of international goods are unhealthy for us, because they're made from scavenged material that contains other toxins. It's a horrific industry, and look in the background. Like, one way to look at this is, oh, what a poor child that has to sort wires as a kid. And then the other way to look at this is, where are people living? Look at all that wire, right? Like, those are homes and those are people, like, all over the world. If you want to look at gross pictures of e-waste recycling, they're easy to find. I don't want to bum you out too much. Like, look at Homie right there. He's using his wok to melt all the insulation off of wires. So he's going to get about a penny's worth of copper. And then he's going to scrape that wok and he's going to make his dinner in there. Anyway, e-waste. really ugly problem that nobody is solving. What we should probably do is force our manufacturers to demanufacture products. And I'm sure we're all going to like that because it's going to make your iPhone $80 more expensive. Right? We should fold that in. It's called a polluter pays system. We should make Apple responsible to disassemble what they build. So that gives them an incentive to make it easier to disassemble, and it gives us a disincentive to buy things that are hard to disassemble, right? Because you don't want to pay the extra $80. But nobody wants to do that because we don't like taxing ourselves. We like to shift our problems to other people. I'm a big fan of that. I make my kids do all the dirty work in this house. All right. There's a couple of study goals that I skipped. Maybe you noticed. What about 38, 39 and stuff? The incinerators. This is tricky, but not that tricky. When most people talk about incinerators, they mean old school incinerators, which is just all the trash, light it on fire. It's a really good way to not have to deal with a big pile of trash. You make a small pile of ashes. And really, like when the College Board asks you about incineration, they're asking about old school incineration. It was a big topic in the United States, kind of like Love Canal. Like, dude, why are they burning all this trash right next to my hospital? They used to be all over the United States. And this is like the dirtiest air pollution. Technically, the most toxic chemical known to man is dioxin. It's deadly at 3 parts per billion with a B. Dioxin is the deadliest thing. And the main source is incinerators. So nobody likes incinerators. In the United States, they're very unpopular, mostly illegal. Almost all of our trash goes into sanitary landfills in the United States. But I gotta tell you, look at 39 and 44. There is a future. The idea is if you can sort the product and you can regulate the gases that are in the burning chamber, like a really good car, if you can sort the fuel and then regulate the gases, you get clean emissions. It's possible to do this. That also gives you a bunch of energy because, it's fuel and you can use that heat to make steam, right? To spin turbines to make electricity, and you can sell that electricity so waste disposal is cheaper. And it doesn't take a lot of land. You just bury little bricks of ashes. So there's tremendous cost savings, tremendous profit. You get energy out of this, so you prevent climate change. And the investment in modern, high-tech, cutting-edge incinerators is starting to look really good. They have a lot of potential. Now, there's really no major worldwide like industrial scale incinerators. They're not really happening yet, but they could. So when the College Board talks about incinerator, they're talking about old school. And you should keep your ears open, because if you ever get a chance to invest in modern incinerators, that could work. I've got a couple of quick reminders for you. These are just clarifications and things that didn't fit. I've used a lot of words in my lectures, but I didn't write them down or explain, so here they are. Leachate is the biggest problem with landfills. It's the T you get at the bottom. And methane is a common gas. You should remember this, CH4, natural gas. It's the fossil fuel that you burn that makes heat to make steam to spin the turbine to generate electricity, right? This is natural gas, methane. It's the reason you can light your farts, methane. You're supposed to remember when I say methane, you're supposed to think farts, and then you're supposed to think anaerobic decomposition, like in your intestines, anaerobic. And so there's a lot of anaerobic decomposition in a landfill, so landfills make a lot of methane. And here's the interesting thing, that methane is a problem because the landfill burps out farts to make climate change. Remember, like methane hydrate, like the permafrost stuff, big positive feedback methane? You can see all these connections, by the way. Once we get to the end of the class, it all starts to fit together. Now we should start talking about environmental issues, now that you've had all the units. Problem, methane, climate change. But what if we started to capture and use that methane? The flip side is the biggest gas that comes out of landfills is also an energy source if you can capture it and make it into electricity. So anyway, that's the methane. Remember that waste reduction is the most energy efficient way to handle trash, because the trash was never trash in the first place, right? Like, if we stop taking the disposable cup, we're reducing the impact of making cups plus the impact of getting rid of cups. So reducing has got to be the most energy efficient. And then if you're going to get a disposable coffee cup, you could use it twice and spread out that cost. So if you were going to rank them, reducing is the most righteous way to save energy. And then reusing is better. Recycling is nice, but that's still the most energy use, right? So reduce, reuse, recycle. There's a reason for that order. And I dropped a term. I said subsidies are government dollars that are used to support an economic sector. Like, we subsidize corn because we want food to be cheap, so we make corn profitable to grow. Farmers that grow corn get like $1,000 checks from the government. Make sense? Subsidies are government dollars to support an industry so that it's cheaper for consumers. Now, what's crazy is we subsidize mining, but we don't subsidize recycling. As a matter of fact, we even tax recycling. I mean, honestly, there is a way this makes sense. You want a steady supply of raw goods, so that's why we subsidize it, so that the copper industry never runs out. We got to keep the copper coming. So let's just pay those copper mines more money. No taxes, but recycling industry is usually small potatoes. There's 1 trillion of those everywhere. I just got to recycle. I got to subsidize 4 copper mines, or I got to figure out how to keep track of and help 4,000 recycling companies in every city in America. So we subsidize virgin material, but we tax small recycling businesses. It's crazy. I got to put this somewhere. Here's the question. Where should landfills go? And what's interesting is, if you want to look at the places where landfills are, or in this case, where the dirtiest industries are, we seem to put all the dirty stuff where land is cheap. And in our country, skin color is a good predictor for income because of mysterious economic forces. And so you get a type of environmental racism where the dirtiest toxic industries are usually mapped out over communities of color. It's also where the landfills are. It's also where the factories are. That's also where the noise pollution is. That's also where the hazardous gas releases are. This is one of the themes that I've had to cut from my class. But speaking of landfills and hazardous material, I just wanted to make sure that I didn't finish our course without reminding you how real that is. For anybody who's curious, here's some hard data on recycling. You use a lot less energy processing used aluminum than you do to make new aluminum. So here's some hard numbers on that. And then also for glass, paper, plastics, those are energy savings. So paper is 40% more efficient to recycle than produce new, for example. And I don't even know why I do this, but I got to do this. Trash islands aren't an island. That's not a thing. The pictures that are used for dramatic effect. It's real that there's a lot of plastic in the ocean. That's real. And it is really hazardous, primarily because plastic breaks down into smaller and smaller pieces, but it's still plastic. And if they get small enough, it's called microplastics, and those can enter your cells. And plastic inside of your cells can disrupt chemistry, lead to problems. It's toxic. So plastic in the ocean is a problem. It's a real problem, and it's a big problem. It's just not islands. The pictures you see are fake. The pictures of like huge mats of plastic, those are usually found in bays or coastal areas. The concentrations of plastic in the ocean that are really scary, you could sail right through those and never see it. It's super concentrated, like 100 little pieces in a square foot, but you wouldn't see that. They're little pieces. So it's a real threat, toxic when it gets into cells. It's called microplastics because they're really small. They're usually found right at the top of the ocean where all the ecological activity happens. You might know that's called the micro layer. But they're not islands. I'm sorry, but I got to say that. All right, I'm out of here.